What if the man who promised you love and a home rejected you the moment he saw you simply because of your size? Would you shrink back in shame or stand taller than ever? And what if a rugged lumberjack saw not your flaw but your strength? What would happen then? The relentless clatter of the train wheels had been the rhythm of my life for 6 days, a metal heartbeat counting down the miles to a future I had only dared to dream of in letters. 6 days of watching the manicured fields of Massachusetts bleed into the stark open plains, then climb into the jagged, unforgiving mountains of the West. Now that rhythm was slowing, groaning to a halt, and my own heart threatened to seize in my chest. My name is Abigail Rose Clayton, and for all of my 26 years I have been a woman of unusual proportions. Back in Boston, to stand at 6 feet tall was to be a curiosity, a landmark in a crowd. It meant a life of ducking through doorways of sidelong glances and whispered remarks that snagged on me like burrs. It meant a quiet existence spent with my books and my sewing, my dreams folded away as neatly as the fabrics I worked with. But the letters in my satchel tucked beside my heart promised an end to that. They were from a man named Mr. Arthur Finch, the proprietor of a prosperous sawmill in a town called Stone Pine Ridge, Oregon. For 6 months his words had been my lifeline. He wrote of commerce and timber, of building a community from the wilderness, of needing a partner to share in the endeavor. His script was precise, his language formal, but beneath it I sensed a desire for companionship that mirrored my own. He never asked about my appearance, and in a foolish, hopeful act of self-preservation, I never offered the one detail that had defined me for so long. I sent a photograph, but one taken seated at my sewing machine, my height cleverly disguised by the angle and my work. It felt like a sin of omission, a quiet lie I prayed he would forgive. The train hissed, a great exhalation of steam that billowed into the frigid air, instantly crystallizing on the window panes. This was it, Stone Pine Ridge. The name itself sounded sturdy-rooted. I smoothed the deep evergreen wool of my dress, a garment I had sewn myself. The stitches were even and strong, a testament to the only craft I truly mastered. I took a deep breath, the air so cold it burned my lungs, and told myself this was not an end, but a beginning. Stepping down from the carriage was like stepping into another world. The cold was a physical blow, a raw, biting thing that snatched the breath from my lips and turned it to smoke. The late afternoon sun was a weak pewter disk in a steel-gray sky, offering no warmth, only a harsh light that illuminated the starkness of the town. The platform was a narrow artery of weathered planks. Beyond it, the main street was a ribbon of frozen, rutted mud, hemmed in by raw-boned wooden buildings with false fronts and crooked signs. The entire town seemed to be carved from the surrounding forest, huddled beneath the immense snow-dusted pines that pressed in from all sides, their silence vast and ancient. My worn leather suitcase felt flimsy in my gloved hand. I cast my gaze around the platform, searching for the man from my letters. He described himself as being of average height with sandy hair and a neatly trimmed beard. But the platform was empty, save for a few rough-looking men in heavy coats who were unloading freight. A group of loggers, their faces chapped red by the cold, loitered outside a saloon, their talk stalling as their eyes landed on me. Their gazes traveled the length of me, from the tips of my sturdy boots to the crown of my bonnet, and a low whistle cut through the air. A familiar heat crept up my neck, the old shame as sharp and unwelcome as the wind. Then a man stepped out from the doorway of the general store. He fit the description perfectly, sandy hair peeking from under a smart felt hat, a tidy beard, a solid frame. But my heart sank like a stone in a frozen river. He was, as he'd said, of average height. My shoulders, even without a heel on my boots, were a good 4 inches above his. He approached his steps hesitant, his gaze already filled with a dawning horror. "Miss Clayton," he asked, the words a question, but his tone a judgment. I forced a calm. I did not feel a composure practiced over a lifetime of being stared at. "Mr. Finch," I replied, my voice steadier than I expected. I offered him my hand, the gesture a bridge I hoped we could cross. "It is a pleasure to finally meet you in person." He took my hand, but his touch was brief, his fingers barely grazing my glove before he pulled back as if he'd touched a hot stove. His eyes darted from my face to my feet and back up again, a swift, brutal calculation. "You failed to mention," he began, his voice tight, strained, "your considerable stature." I held his gaze, refusing to flinch, refusing to shrink. "And you, sir, failed to ask." The corner of his mouth twitched. You are taller than I am." He stated it as if it were an accusation, a personal affront. "Yes," I said, the word clipped, devoid of apology. I am. He took a physical step back, creating a chasm between us on the cold platform. This will not do. This will not do at all. He spoke more to himself than to me, his face flushing a blotchy red. I require a wife, Miss Clayton, a helpmeet, a woman who fits the role. The role, I echoed, my throat suddenly dry. The hope I had carried for 6 days, for 6 months, was beginning to curdle into a familiar bitter dread. A wife should be a delicate presence, he muttered, his eyes refusing to meet mine, instead fixing on some point over my shoulder. She should look up to her husband. It is the natural order of things. It is proper. From the saloon, a rough chuckle broke the quiet. The sound was like a slap. My spine stiffened. All the air seemed to have been sucked out of my lungs, replaced by ice. In your letters, I said, my voice low but unwavering, you wrote that you wanted a partner, someone with whom to build a life. You spoke of shared burdens and mutual respect. I wanted a normal woman, he snapped, then had the decency to wince at his own cruelty. I mean to say, a woman of ordinary size. This is a spectacle. It is unseemly. My heart, which had been fluttering with nervous anticipation just moments before, now felt as though it were cracking, the fissures spreading with each cold word he uttered. A spectacle. The very word they used for me in Boston. I had traveled 2,000 miles only to find the same cage. He was already backing away, eager to be done with the mortifying business of me. I will make arrangements for your return passage. The eastbound train passes through tomorrow morning. I will leave the ticket for you at the station master's office. The blood drained from my face, leaving my skin feeling tight and cold. Mr. Finch, I used every cent I had to make this journey. I sold my mother's locket. I have nothing to return to. I am sorry, he mumbled, the apology as thin and brittle as a shard of ice. He was already turning away, his focus on escaping the scene, on erasing his colossal mistake. Truly. And just like that, he was gone, disappearing back into the warmth of his general store, leaving me alone in the deepening chill of the Oregon afternoon. The loggers outside the saloon were no longer trying to hide their amusement. That's a tall drink of water, one of them called out, followed by a chorus of laughter. Don't you worry, miss. You're big enough to build your own damn sawmill. I did not grant them the satisfaction of a reply. I picked up my suitcase and stepped off the platform. My boots sank into the frozen mud, the cold seeping through the leather. The suitcase, filled with my meager hopes and worldly possessions, felt 100 times heavier than it had an hour ago. But I carried it just as I had always carried the burden of my height, without complaint, my back straight, my head held high. It was the only defense I had ever known. I walked past the general store, not daring to look in the window. I walked past the saloon, the laughter following me like a stray dog. I walked past the small church with its peeling white paint and its lonely steeple pointing a finger at the indifferent sky. I walked until the last of the ramshackle buildings gave way to the towering pines, their snow-laden branches muffling the sounds of the town. I found a fallen log, brushed the snow from its surface, and sat down. My breath came in visible plumes, each one a testament to the life that still persisted in my chest, though I wasn't sure why. The silence of the forest was absolute, profound. It did not judge. It did not stare. It simply was. And in that vast, cold quiet, I finally allowed myself to feel the full weight of my despair. I had come here for a new life. And in less than 10 minutes, that life had been declared null and void. I was stranded, penniless, and utterly, terrifyingly alone. Chapter 2. Ampere's Hand in the Gloom. The silence of the forest was a heavy blanket, and I let it settle over me, the cold seeping deep into my bones. For a long while, I just sat there on that fallen log, watching the light fade from the sky, the world turning to shades of blue and charcoal. I felt as hollowed out as a dead tree, my dreams nothing more than sawdust at my feet. The thought of the morning train, of the long, humiliating journey back to a life of whispers and shadows, was a weight too heavy to contemplate. It was then that a voice, deep and steady as the woods around me, broke the stillness. The world looks different from up here, doesn't it? I jolted, my head snapping around. A man stood a few yards away, leaning against the trunk of a massive pine. He was enormous, taller even than I was, with shoulders that seemed as broad as a doorway. His sleeves were rolled up despite the cold, revealing muscular forearms, and a thick, dark beard framed a strong jaw. But it was his eyes that held me. They were a startling clear blue, the color of a mountain lake. And they regarded me with a calm curiosity, utterly devoid of the mockery or pity I had come to expect. I didn't mean to startle you, he said, his voice a low rumble. He pushed off the tree and took a few steps closer but kept a respectful distance. My name is Silas Croft. I run the northern logging camp. I could only stare my throat tight. Why was he here? Had he followed me from the town to join in the sport of mocking the giantess? He seemed to read the suspicion in my face. I saw what happened back there, he said, simply, his gaze direct. With Finch, it was a damnable thing to do. I found my voice, though it was brittle. I don't need your pity, Mr. Croft. It's not pity I'm offering, he replied, his tone even. He crossed his arms over his chest. It's a direction. There's a boarding house at the other end of town run by a woman named Ellie Vance. She's a good soul. You'll find a clean bed there and a hot meal. The eastbound train isn't your only option. I hesitated, suspicion warring with a desperate need for a lifeline. Why would you help me? You don't know me. A faint, wry smile touched his lips, crinkling the corners of his blue eyes. Because no one deserves to be left stranded in the cold, he said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. And because I've always found that the folks who don't quite fit the mold, they're usually the most interesting ones. The ones who end up being stronger than the rest. His words struck a chord deep inside me, a place that hadn't been touched by kindness in a very long time. He wasn't just seeing my height. He was seeing something else. Something I had forgotten was even there. Resilience. Strength. He saw it as a virtue, not a flaw. I looked down at my worn suitcase, then back up at his honest, open face. The alternative was a night spent in the freezing train station waiting for a ticket paid for by the man who had shattered my hopes. A small nod was all I could manage. All right, Mr. Croft. Silas, he corrected gently. And you are Miss Clayton, I presume, Abigail, I whispered. Well, Abigail, he said, his smile warming slightly. Let's get you out of this cold. He didn't offer to take my suitcase, and for that I was grateful. He seemed to understand that I needed to carry my own weight, that my pride was the only thing I had left. We walked back toward the town, my boots crunching on the frozen ground beside his long, confident strides. The lights were beginning to flicker on in the windows of Stone Pine Ridge, casting warm yellow squares onto the snow-dusted street. As we walked, I felt the town's eyes on us. Heads turned, curtains were pulled back. The loggers from the saloon fell silent once more, but this time their stares were different. They weren't just looking at me anymore. They were looking at the man walking beside me. With Silas Croft at my side, their derision seemed to lose its edge. His presence was a shield, a silent declaration that I was not an object of ridicule to be discarded. He led me to a large 2-story house with a welcoming porch and smoke curling from its chimney. A sign hanging by the door read Vance Boarding House, Rooms and Meals. Silas stopped at the gate. Ellie will see you're taken care of, he said. Don't you worry about Finch or anyone else. You've a right to be here as much as any of them. Thank you, Silas, I said, the words feeling inadequate. I don't know how I can repay you. He just shook his head. Get some rest, Abigail. That's repayment enough. The world can look a whole lot better after a hot meal and a decent night's sleep. He tipped his head in a gesture of farewell and turned his tall frame, disappearing into the gathering dark. I stood there for a moment, clutching my suitcase, the cold air still biting at my face. But for the first time since stepping off that train, a tiny, fragile ember of warmth had been kindled within me. Tomorrow I might have to face the humiliation of leaving, or I might have to find the courage to stay. But tonight I was not alone. And that, I realized, was enough. Chapter 3. The First Stitch. The warmth inside the Vance boarding house was immediate and enveloping, a stark contrast to the biting cold I had left on the porch. The air smelled of roasting meat, baking bread, and beeswax. When I stepped into the front parlor, a woman bustled out from a back room, wiping her hands on an apron. She was stout and energetic, with kind eyes and hair the color of spun silver pulled into a neat bun. "Can I help you, dear?" she asked, her gaze taking in my height, my suitcase, and the weariness I was sure was etched onto my face. "My name is Abigail Clayton," I said, my voice still a little shaky. "A man named Silas Croft sent me. He said you might have a room." Her expression softened instantly. "Silas sent you? Well then, come in, come in. Don't just stand there letting in the cold. Any friend of Silas is a friend of mine. I'm Ellie Vance." She led me through the cozy parlor, which was dominated by a large stone fireplace where a cheerful fire crackled and spat. When we reached the hallway leading to the staircase, I instinctively ducked my head. Ellie stopped and placed a gentle hand on my arm. "No need for that here, Abigail," she said, her eyes twinkling with understanding. My late husband Thomas was as tall as a pine himself. Had me raise every last door frame in this house the year we built it. He always said he was tired of living his life looking like a hunchback. I straightened slowly, a lump forming in my throat. To have a space built for someone of my stature, to have that simple consideration be a part of the very walls around me, was a kindness so profound and unexpected it nearly brought me to tears. "Thank you," I said, the words catching. "Nonsense," she waved it off. "A person ought to be able to stand up straight in their own home or a place that's meant to feel like one. Now let's get you settled." The room she gave me on the second floor was small but immaculately clean, with a heavy quilt on the bed and a window that looked out over the snow-covered pines. After a dinner of venison stew and fresh-baked bread that tasted like heaven, I slept a deep, dreamless sleep, the first in over a week. I awoke the next morning to the smell of coffee and frying bacon. For a moment, lying under the heavy quilt, the crushing weight of the previous day returned. The eastbound train, the ticket waiting for me. But then I remembered Ellie's raised doorways and Silas Croft's steady gaze. Downstairs, I found Ellie in the kitchen. She poured me a mug of coffee without a word and pointed to a seat at the heavy oak table. We sat in comfortable silence for a while before she finally spoke, her tone gentle but direct. "Silas told me what that fool Arthur Finch did to you." I looked down at my coffee cup. It was humiliating. "It was cruel," she corrected firmly. "Arthur Finch is a man who cares more for appearances than he does for character. You're better off without him. So what's your plan, Abigail? Are you taking that train?" The question hung in the air between us. I thought of the whispers in Boston, of the life of quiet invisibility that awaited me there. Then I thought of the feeling of standing up straight in Ellie's hallway. "No," I said, the decision solidifying as I spoke the word aloud. "I'm not. I can't. I have skills. I'm a seamstress. I can sew anything from a lady's dress to a canvas tent. I can earn my keep. I just need a chance." A slow, broad smile spread across Ellie's face. "I knew I liked you," she said. She stood and walked to a door off the kitchen. "This little room off the back porch used to be my sewing space before my eyes got too tired for fine stitches. It gets good morning light. It's dusty, but it's yours if you want it. You can pay me in rent when the work starts coming in, and until then, you can help me with the mending around here. My winter coat has a tear in the lining I've been ignoring for a month." Tears pricked my eyes, but this time they were tears of gratitude. I wouldn't want to impose. "Don't be silly," Ellie interrupted, waving a hand. "This town is full of loggers who tear their clothes to shreds and women who are too busy to mend them. A good seamstress is a godsend. You're not imposing. You're providing a service." By mid-morning, I had transformed the dusty back room. I unpacked my needles, my threads, my thimbles, and my precious bolts of fabric. I set up a small table by the window and arranged my tools, running my fingers over the sturdy wool and crisp cotton I'd brought from Boston. I felt a sense of purpose return to me, a quiet rhythm settling back into my soul. There was work to be done. Word in a town like Stone Pine Ridge travels faster than a winter wind. By noon, a woman came by with a daughter's dress that needed its hem let down. An hour later, 2 more arrived with shirts needing patched elbows. They were hesitant at first, their curiosity about the tall woman Finch sent away plain on their faces. But I met them with professionalism and a quiet smile. I took their measurements, discussed fabrics, and promised fair prices and quick work. My hands, I knew, spoke a more convincing language than my mouth ever could. Late in the afternoon, as I was carefully stitching a new collar onto a man's worn shirt, a large frame filled the doorway. "Miss Clayton," Silas Croft said, removing his hat. I looked up, my heart giving a little flutter. "Silas, I thought you would be back at your camp." "Heading there now," he said, his blue eyes scanning my little workshop with approval. "Just wanted to see if you were still in town." "I am," I said, a small smile touching my lips. "Thanks to you and Ellie." "Good." He paused, shifting his weight. "You planning on staying a while then, I replied, feeling a newfound confidence. He nodded, a look of satisfaction on his face. "Then I have a proposition for you. My men, they're good at felling trees, but they're hell on their clothes. They tear through their gear like wolverines in a hen house. There isn't a soul up at the camp who can stitch a straight line to save their life. We need a skilled seamstress." I blinked, surprised. "You're offering me work, I'm offering you steady coin for steady repairs," he clarified, looking almost embarrassed by his own forwardness. "I'll have one of my boys bring a load down every week. It could be good business for you." That's very generous, Silas." "It's not generous," he said gruffly. "It's practical. You have a skill we need. It's a fair trade." He turned to leave, then paused at the door. "There's a town social at the church hall next Saturday. The whole town turns out. It's a good place to meet folks, maybe drum up some more business." My stomach tightened at the thought of facing the whole town. "Are you going?" "Not usually my kind of thing," he admitted, "but I might be this time." I watched him walk away, his tall, solid form moving with an easy strength. I looked down at the shirt in my hands, at the neat, precise stitches I was making. I didn't have a husband or a home to return to in the East. But here in a small, cold corner of Oregon, I had a needle and thread. I had a purpose. And I had the possibility of something more. Something that was just beginning, like the first tentative stitch in a long and complicated seam. Chapter 4. The Measure of a Man. The days leading up to the church social passed in a blur of fabric and thread. My little room at the back of the boarding house became a hive of activity. Women brought dresses with torn lace and worn seams. Men looking awkward and clutching battered shirts dropped off garments split from shoulder to cuff. Mothers arrived with children's overalls, the knees worn through from endless play in the unforgiving landscape. I worked from the first light of dawn until my eyes ached in the evening lamplight, the steady hum of my sewing machine a constant comforting companion. The whispers hadn't stopped, of course. In the saloon, I heard they'd taken to calling me the Timberline Seamstress, a name that was part joke, part grudging respect. When I walked to the general store, pointedly avoiding Arthur Finch, who now looked right through me as if I were a ghost, I could feel the stares. But they were changing. The open mockery had faded, replaced by a wary curiosity. My work spoke for me. My stitches were strong, my prices fair. In a town built on hard work and practicality, skill was a currency everyone understood. One evening, as I was finishing a particularly difficult repair on a heavy logger's coat, Ellie poked her head in. "That Silas Croft sent a message with one of his men," she said, a knowing glint in her eye. "Says to expect a large bundle of repairs at the end of the week. He told his crew her stitches are stronger than a logging chain." "Sounds like you've got yourself an admirer." A warm flush spread through my chest. I looked down at my work, a smile forming on my lips. It wasn't praise for my beauty or my grace, things I had long ago accepted I did not possess. It was praise for my strength, my craft. And coming from a man like Silas, it meant more than any flowery compliment ever could. When Saturday arrived, the sky was a brilliant, cloudless blue. The air so cold and clear, it felt like breathing diamonds. The church social was the event of the season in Stone Pine Ridge, a rare chance for the isolated community to gather under one roof. The scent of roasted chicken and baking pies wafted from the church hall, a delicious promise that cut through the crisp, pine-scented air. I stood before the small mirror in my room, my hands smoothing the fabric of my best dress. It was a deep burgundy wool, a color that reminded me of winter berries against the snow. I had embroidered the collar and cuffs with intricate copper-colored thread. It was not fashionable by Boston standards, perhaps, but it was mine. Sewn by my own hands, it fit me perfectly, the seams strong, the cut modest but proud. I had spent my life trying to make myself smaller, to stoop and fold myself into a shape the world found acceptable. Tonight I would not. I pinned my hair up, allowing a few curls to escape and frame my face. I looked at my reflection, a tall woman in a good dress, her expression serious but determined. I was ready to be seen. Walking into the church hall was like diving into a pool of cold water. The lively chatter and fiddle music faltered the room, quieting as heads turned in my direction. The silence was a familiar cloak, one I had worn my entire life. But for the first time, it didn't feel suffocating. It didn't sting. Let them stare. I lifted my chin a little higher. Ellie Vance, a force of nature in a dark blue dress, immediately swooped in and took my arm. "Abigail, you look breathtaking," she whispered loudly enough for those nearby to hear. "You will make every single one of them regret any unkind word they ever thought." I laughed, the tension easing its grip on me. "That isn't exactly the goal, Ellie." "No," she said with a conspiratorial wink, "but it's a delightful bonus." For the next hour, I moved through the crowded room with Ellie as my guide. I was introduced to the town doctor, a stern-faced man with surprisingly gentle hands, the young school teacher whose eyes widened in admiration, the widow who ran the post office. They asked about my sewing, complimented the repairs I had made for them, and treated me not as a spectacle, but as a new and valuable member of their community. One tiny elderly woman whose head barely reached my waist leaned in and confided, "You know, I've never been able to reach the jam on my top pantry shelf." I do believe you're a blessing. And then the music seemed to fade, the noise of the crowd receding to a dull roar. Silas Croft had stepped through the doorway. He had shed his rough logger's clothes for clean dark trousers and a crisp white shirt that still looked faintly uncomfortable on his broad frame. He looked like the forest itself had decided to put on its Sunday best. His gaze swept the room, found me, and held. He crossed the hall with those long, unhurried steps, a silent force parting the crowd. A few men nodded to him, but no one dared to slow his progress. "Abigail," he said when he reached my side, his deep voice, a calming anchor in the swirl of the room. "You look, well." "As do you, Silas," I replied, my own voice softer than I intended. "I wasn't sure you would come." "I said I might," he answered, the corner of his mouth lifting. "Never said I wouldn't." That was Silas. Understated, direct, and completely sincere. We stood together at the edge of the room, talking quietly. As the fiddle music started up again, he told me about the logging camp, about the immense size of the ancient pines and the dangers his men faced every day. I told him about the different fabrics I worked with and the satisfaction of turning something torn and broken into something whole and useful again. It was a simple conversation, yet it felt more real and meaningful than any I had ever had. Then he looked at me, his blue eyes serious in the flickering candlelight. "Would you care to dance?" I hesitated. My height had always made dancing an awkward, clumsy affair. "It's been a very long time." "Then we'll be clumsy together," he said, holding out his hand. I took it. His hand was large and calloused, engulfing mine completely, but his grip was gentle. He led me onto the dance floor. We moved slowly, at first finding our rhythm. And then the most wonderful thing happened. I didn't have to look down. For the first time in my life, I was dancing with a partner whose eyes were level with my own. Our steps matched. I felt light not just on my feet, but in my soul, as if some tightly wound knot inside my chest had finally been loosened. The music swelled, the fiddle playing a lively reel. We turned once, twice, and I found myself laughing, a genuine, unburdened sound. Silas's hand was firm at my back, not guiding me, as if I were a fragile thing to be managed, but moving with me as an equal. "You're staring," he murmured, his voice close to my ear. "I'm not used to this," I admitted, my cheeks warm. "Most men can't quite figure out what to do with a tall woman on a dance floor." Silas raised an eyebrow. "Most men," he said, his voice dropping lower, "are fools." After the dance ended, we stood by the refreshment table sipping cider. My gaze drifted across the room and suddenly froze. Arthur Finch was standing near the back, his arms crossed, watching us. His mouth was set in a thin, disapproving line, his eyes narrowed with something that looked like a mixture of contempt and disbelief. Silas followed my gaze. "Ignore him," he said, his voice tight. "I intend to," I replied, but my newfound lightness had vanished. But Arthur wasn't content to watch from a distance. He threaded his way through the crowd, a polite, brittle smile pinned to his face. "Miss Clayton," he said, his voice oozing a false cordiality. "Mr. Croft, I must confess I'm surprised to see the two of you here tonight." Silas stiffened beside me. "We're here like everyone else, Finch, to socialize." "Of course," Arthur said smoothly, his eyes flicking between us, "though some might say that the sight of certain pairings might cause tongues to wag." I tilted my head, refusing to be baited by his insinuation. "Let them wag, Mr. Finch. I have been talked about my entire life. It doesn't change the truth of who I am." Arthur's smile tightened. "Stone Pine Ridge values its traditions, its propriety." "Then perhaps it's time those traditions grew a little taller," Silas countered, his voice a low growl. Arthur's gaze landed on me again, full of malice. "Well, enjoy the dance floor, Miss Clayton. Though one does have to wonder, do your feet even fit on it?" It was a cheap, cruel jab meant to cut me down to size. Silas took a step forward, his hands clenching into fists, but I stopped him with a light touch on his arm. I turned and looked Arthur Finch directly in the eye, my voice as cold and clear as the winter air outside. "I would rather have feet too big for the floor, sir, than a heart too small to hold a shred of human decency." A dark red flush crept up Arthur's neck. For a moment he was speechless. "You're making a mistake," he finally stammered. "No," I replied quietly. "I've just stopped making yours." He turned on his heel and stalked away, his angry footsteps echoing on the hardwood floor. Silas let out a long, slow breath beside me. "You handled that better than I would have." I turned back to him, my heart still pounding. "You give me courage, Silas." He offered me a small, genuine smile that transformed his rugged face. "You already had it, Abigail. I just reminded you it was there." The rest of the evening passed in a warm, hazy glow. As Silas walked me back to the boarding house under a sky overflowing with stars, the world felt quiet and full of promise. At the gate he paused. "Thank you for the dance, Abigail. Thank you for showing up," I said softly. "It meant more than you know." He looked at me then, his blue eyes full of a startling reverence. "You are a remarkable woman, Abigail Clayton." And before I could find the words to reply, he tipped his hat and was gone, swallowed by the darkness. I walked inside, my heart soaring. Ellie looked up from her knitting by the fire. "Well," she said with a satisfied smile, "it seems you've given that man something to think about besides timber tonight." I didn't answer. I just touched the collar of my dress where his hand had rested, and walked up the stairs for the first time in my life, not trying to take up less space in the world, but finally daring to fill it completely. Enjoying these epic Wild West stories? Hit subscribe for more gripping tales of bravery, conflict, and unexpected heroes. Now tap the video on screen to experience a story with a twist you'll never forget.